The Wild Tameless is about expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness. Our guests share their wisdom found from branching out into the unseen realms through alternative philosophy and mystical experiences. We focus on the soul component of the human experience and also touch on mind, body, and heart as we introduce pragmatic practices to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. We touch on modalities of health, ceremony, and ritual to help people harmonize their own energy and open up to the magic around them. The Wild Tameless is nature. It's the human spirit. It's music, art, and creation itself. This podcast is about helping people open to the great mystery so that we can collectively remember our place in the web of life and reorient our way forward for generations to come. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Kyle Dow.
Hello, friends. Welcome to all of our podcasts. Since we all run our own independent podcast, this will just be the podcast where we talk about philosophy, spirituality, amongst other things. My name is Brad, Zach, Kyle. Kyle, this is the second podcast of a series that we're just going to keep on rolling with. On the last podcast, Kyle, why don't you launch us off? What's the recap on what we discussed in our last
On our last podcast, which you can catch on all of our different feeds, we spoke about starting on a spiritual path. We spoke about some of those practices for living a spiritual life, and in that comes authenticity. We spoke about dieta and the benefits of going on dieta, right? So eliminating things from your life as a practice of devotion. We spoke about fate and free will, the experience of love, devotion, sacred union, adapting to change, which is something we're going to elaborate on a little bit this time. And then the potential loneliness that comes with walking a spiritual path and how to overcome that, which includes finding joy in life and also connection in nature.
Yeah.
So if that interests you, check that episode out. It was pretty rich, I would say.
Yeah, it was pretty rich. It was a pretty long one too, I think. We talked for at least an hour and a half.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So right now it is eclipse time. One of the topics that I was wanting to speak of is just change, and my own resistance to change is what I'm feeling the last 24 hours specifically. Kyle, what was one you wanted to speak about?
We're going to speak a little bit about service and community as well.
Yeah. And Zachary, what's alive for you?
I was offering that we could speak about the nature of subconscious reprogramming and the practices associated with that.
Yeah, I like that. Where should we start?
Change?
Unless you're resistant to that.
No, let's get right into it. I honestly didn't realize how resistant I am to it. I'm becoming more aware of my resistance to change as I feel like my life is changing at a faster pace. And I don't know if it's just my life or it's just like the whole world is just changing faster and everyone's feeling it. But yeah, it's very uncomfortable in my body. And I'm usually not that sensitive to things like the eclipse. And I've noticed this year, I just feel like I'm getting more sensitive to life, which is beautiful in a lot of ways, especially when you're doing like really beautiful ceremonies and you're emotionally feeling just love and beauty. But I feel like it goes both ways sometimes. And I'm not used to it. So I'm getting used to it, and I'm wanting to open to it and not judge it is very important, I feel. Yeah.
So one of the changes is your actual energetic sensitivity. And is there any other particular changes that you could speak to? Or is it more of a personal matter?
I'm not 100% sure how to identify it even. I feel it in the body, like discomfort in the body. And so I'm finding myself leaning on breathing, like just deep breathing. Not like hyperventilating or anything, but just really breathing through it to have to regulate. And I've never really felt like I needed to do breath work stuff to regulate myself. I did it because it's what everyone's doing.
And a good tool.
It's a good tool, but I've never really used it in a way that I need to do this to like regulate. And now I'm starting to feel like, okay, I need to like sit down and do some breathing and regulate myself. So
good awareness.
Yeah, good awareness. But it's strange to feel like things are changing because I don't know what's changing. I'm not sure what it is. And maybe I don't need to know at this point, but I am aware of the feeling inside. It feels like a resistance to change. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be a seasonal thing. I mean, it is springtime. We just had the equinox not too long ago. We're going through all these eclipses. It's funny, I was speaking to a friend today, and he's like, yeah, I'm often really affected by full moons, but I don't believe in like the effects of the eclipse. It's like, well, how could those are like two energetic forces that are coming at us astrologically? It's like, how can you believe in one and not the other? And I think it's important to have awareness of both the seasons and the cycles of the moon and how that affects our body and our psyche and our energetic field.
Also, what does it mean to not believe in it? Because I don't think anyone disagrees that like the moon moves tides and gravity in the waters, and we all know we're made of water. So like, to not believe in it, I would want to know more about what that means.
Well, I could kind of see his point. Like, there's a lot of hype around it, so there's kind of like this like thought form where everybody's like, oh yeah, I'm so affected by this retrograde or whatever it may be, and how much is that playing into our perception of our experience?
Like self-fulfilling
or like a placebo effect, right? Like, no doubt it has an effect, but some people are more sensitive than others. And I think our sensitivity is dependent on our openness, and our openness comes from spiritual practice and like self-awareness and the things we do to actually purify our vessel in order to be receptive to, I guess, the non-material and non-visible world. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And the one thing that comes to mind is something that I heard, I believe from Sadhguru, but it's a concept in the yogic understanding that yes, the planets have an influence on us. Yes, the seasons do, and so many things outside of ourselves. And the more developed we are with our breath mastery, it's our life force mastery. And the less external influences have that effect on us as like a vulnerability, like a victimization from external forces. And the more that we can choose how we react and show up to those things. So I think that's important, because there are external effects, and many of those people, which I think you're alluding to, it's kind of like playing victim. Oh, Mercury's in retrograde, I'm this way, which has a truth to it. And then it's like, how can we responsibly react to that? And as you said, everyone's different in their sensitivities to that as well. So
yeah, taking ownership over our experience. And when I hear you speak to the breath, that to me is knowing our center, right? Finding our anchor in our center. And when we're really familiar with that, then we can identify, this is my energy. And when we feel other resonance that might be dysregulating, we could identify that it's coming from some other source, right? So being able to distinguish the inner and outer world. And also where those two kind of blend in and mesh with each other naturally. Yeah.
But I even with what I'm feeling, it's like I have some of these tools that I've learned over the years, and now I'm using them in a way that when I'm actually like needing it more so than just doing it because that's a training I did. So now it's like coming in handy. Like, these trainings are useful for me personally versus like facilitating for somebody else, or because then you can regulate. Definitely I have been doing it, taking a minute, using the breath, re-regulating.
And so how does resistance factor into your experience?
I'm not 100% sure it does, because I'm not sure what the trying to put words to the feeling. I'm not exactly sure what to call it. It's probably the more accurate part is discomfort. It's uncomfortable, which makes me feel like something's moving or changing, and maybe I'm resisting it, and that is what's making it uncomfortable, but I'm not like actually sure if that's what I'm doing. But I am using the breath to deal with it. Yeah.
So like, change is inevitable, and it's just happening all the time.
Yeah.
And it seems like we could arrive in a place of awareness hell. So if I was constantly numbing myself through alcohol and other substances, other addictions, and that could be like my phone or even something seemingly positive like work or exercise, then I'm blocking out the sensitivity or my how I'm affected by change. You know what I mean? Kind of like ignorance is bliss. And so there's certain things that people do to create that ignorance. And so how do we think about that? It's like, on one hand, life is almost easier the more numb we are, right? So if you're actually ignorant of these cycles of change and the effect of the eclipse and the full moon and the springtime, then you're just like, oh yeah, this is just life.
I think in the short run, maybe that's where the term ignorance is bliss comes from, is in the short term, it can have a level of bliss, but in the long run, the real karma of the ignorance catches up and it's suffering. It's worse. That's what I think.
Two important skills that I've found through practice is detachment and expression. And detachment is a little bit more masculine as I understand it. And that's the capacity to not numb out, but to feel, but not to react to it. There's like a little distance. You could say like the spirit is a little distance from the body and the mind and the emotions, but still feeling a little different than numbing it, but also the capacity to express it and to move the emotion, because detachment is often practiced in meditation, and energy work like breath work and dance is more moving the energy, and it's about feeling it and expressing it. But I think the harmony there is when we're really good at detaching, that's the best way to express, because we're not attached to what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And we don't create the same clinging to it, as well as we don't get caught up in the story of it. And it creates a resilience in the system to actually move deeper into feeling more. And as we feel more, I feel like you mentioned it in the pod or just before, it's like as we become more sensitive and aware, we're going to feel more pleasure and more pain. And I feel like that's part of the journey we walk on the spiritual path, is saying yes, not only to, for myself, I know I was once running away from my own emotions, but the more you have capacity to deal with your own or my own, then I open up to feeling the emotions of the whole world, the collective sadness, the collective joy. And we gain more and more resilience to keep expanding and doing our best not to contract when we begin to open ourselves up to the real horrors of the world.
Yeah.
Expanding and regulating as we take on more and more awareness of these energies or emotions. I'm reminded of a quote, and I'm not sure who said it. I haven't thought of this one in years, but a feeling fully felt is bliss. So it doesn't matter what that feeling is, but to feel it fully, it's like, oh wow, I'm alive. I feel really alive right now. And then if we could get away from the identification of good and bad feelings, then it's all just an experience of life moving through us.
I even think, like, I know an important part of, well, just with identification in general, how many of us deal with identification. We often want to identify with the good feelings. I am happy, I am joyful, but then there's a rejection of the bad ones or the difficult experiences. When I think as you become a little more conscious, the language can shift, and it's like sadness is occurring or joy is occurring without making it my personal joy or anything. And I think that does open the playing field for like whose joy it is, whether it's collective joy or my joy is not as relevant. You can just feel and you can move energy. There are beings that'll move energy for the collective. It's not their energy, like, because there's less attachment to like whose energy it is. They're just doing the work for everyone. Yeah.
The Buddha laid all this out really well. Well, much of what we're speaking to in terms of like, if we come into equanimity and we're present with our sensations, naturally our habit pattern reactions will arise of pleasure and pain. This will come up in the system, just doing nothing, not needing to do anything. And then our craving for what is pleasurable and our aversion to what is discomforting will come up. And the more we sit in our contentment and we detach from those, reacting to them, more and more and more will come up, become more uncomfortable. And if you ever
As you're detaching, more's come through.
If you ever sat in a Vipassana and you're doing those long hours, it just gets more and more uncomfortable. Some of the most intense pain in my life was sitting in meditation, nothing happening.
Right.
nothing doing, just sitting.
Right.
And it just comes up. And that's like, anybody has that capacity, no matter if they're meditating or not. If they're willing to feel, it just opens up the deeper parts of our psyche. And most people stay on the surface where it's more comfortable. But when we're willing to stay yes, we drop deeper into our center. And the closer we go to our center, we have to go through all those layers of not self and the uncomfortable, icky, sticky parts. And we eventually get to the bliss body, which is when we make peace and we can find that true place of contentment where the joy is not attached to the external things, which most of us have spent most of our life, and we're learning to return, which is the art of true religion, is returning. Redemption. That's why it has the re in there. It's the turning this way instead of going outwards.
Yeah.
And so what about, I think it's important to speak to that pleasure seeking, I don't know, way of modern society, where we're always like reaching for the next hit of dopamine, and to sit there and do nothing in a Vipassana or a vision quest is like really hard to do. And have we just become this overstimulated society where we now miss the bliss and the simple joys of like ordinary nature? Like ordinary almost is like a misnomer because it's really extraordinary. You know, the beauty.
Wasn't it you talking about, you were saying the other day about how like just intentional communities that are actually out in nature and off grid and stuff, how if people were to actually try and go out there, there'd be a massive withdrawal on a variety of levels from the addictions of being addicted to society, is what you were saying.
Yeah, stimulus. Like
Stimulus.
We have to go through like a detox, you know, to get to that place where we could just be content in simplicity. And there's like the layers of immersion in nature are essentially infinite. And I think about Tom Brown Jr., who wrote a whole series of books. He has about a dozen books, but it's essentially nature mysticism, and they speak to it as such because he learned from an Apache elder named Stalking Wolf. And essentially what they did is they went into nature for as long as possible with as little as possible. So it was a practice of asceticism, going without, and also survivalism, being able to live off the land. And with that, they reached a deep level of harmony where they were in tune with everything. And Stalking Wolf would walk through the woods and just not miss a single detail. And he would be in such harmony with the environment that he could tell what was happening like 5 kilometers away.
He could tell?
He could tell.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's tuned in.
So it does become like a supernatural experience, and it's unattainable to most people, like that level, being a Jedi like that. But also at the same time, to do a weekend immersion in nature can completely change somebody's perspective and dependency on some of this external stimulus.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this a lot in my writing, like the Buddhists call it Dhamma, the Taoists call it the Tao, and then in the yogic understanding it's Dharma, and they all mean universal law is a rough translation. And it's that place of harmony between the single self and the great self. And it's like, it's a very unique thing that it's really hard to speak about, talk about it in the Tao. It's like the great Tao, that place of harmony, can't really be spoken of in word. And we all have a unique Dharma in that, which is like more integrated into the idea of purpose. So we're not all meant to go off into the forest necessarily and have that kind of sensitivity. That may not be our path. But for some of us, enough of an immersion in that so that we find our living Tao, how we can authentically move through the world and give our authentic gifts and what's most representative of our true core vibration of why we came here. And that'll look different for everyone. I remember I've trained with a lot of Dharma yogis from Dharma Mitra lineage, and he lives in New York. And my understanding of a lot of yogis and shaman is like, New York, that's your chosen place to live. Don't you want to be in nature? But that's where his dharma is. Literally, he's dharma. But that's where his dharma is. So it's like, in New York. And he finds his peace there. That's where his center is. So,
well, that's interesting because Tom Brown Jr. is also in New York State somewhere. A lot of his stories come from the Pine Barrens, and when I think of New York State, I don't think of pristine nature, but everywhere has its own beauty, and that's where he found his deep connection, was in the Pine Barrens, and his philosophy went to inform all the nature connection schools that you find here in the West. So he is like essentially a lineage holder. So it's interesting to hear you speak about another lineage holder, and it would be cool to have like those two guys get together for a conversation and see the similarities in their philosophy. And there's quite a bit, I'm sure. So it's interesting to think about all these different spiritual paths, and we all kind of have different practices and slightly different worldviews that intertwine. And I wonder about the return on investment, and I think you're the most devoted here.
I don't know about that.
Of spiritual practice.
I think you have
return of investment.
yeah, totally. Because what's the 80-20 of spirituality? And it's funny to say it that way, but I think like we were speaking about our modern society that's constantly on the go and like reaching externally, we want to get there quickly. But I'm always so impressed by how many hours you put into your practice.
I sleep most of the time. I just fall asleep and get lazy.
But the question is like, does it have to be a grind?
Spiritual work?
Yeah.
I'm going to start with, I don't think I particularly look at it like a grind, because I feel like it's more like a call. You're being pulled is how I feel. Like I don't often feel like I'm pushing for it. It's kind of like I have to do something. Like I'm now called and I have to go and do ceremony, or I need to. In business, I feel like I grind. I'm like pushing the envelope, but I don't feel like I do that in like spirituality. I don't feel like I have much choice, and I think that a lot of people, once the awakening starts, you can't really stop it. So in that way, you don't really have to like. But maybe that's just me. I've never felt like I don't practice like he does though. Like, his like I feel like you have much more disciplined in approach to your spirituality, and maybe that's just our perception of you. Clearly,
I don't think it's discipline, because I think, I guess, depends how you define discipline.
Yeah,
I feel like I do it because I love it. It's more like if we conceptualize the spiritual path like a way, like a road. We can walk our road in many ways, and we walk our road in different ways at different parts. And if we take it down to like a grounded example of like what people do in the physical, some people work out, and they work out really hard and they grow their muscles really big, and that's their road. And some people practice yoga, where the art of it, depending on who your teacher is, but it's to practice with as little effort as possible. So you refine your movements and your system to be as efficient and as graceful. And that will condition your system to how you approach life. So the person who works really hard has that as a skill, like a David Goggins, something like that, and that works really well for them, and that's their path. And I feel like we align with who we are, or what is most representative of how our soul wants to walk this walk, if we're on the spiritual path, taking it back there, and that will find our way. For me, it is the middle way. I do like to go into periods of intense like work where I am grinding and pushing, and then I come into periods of absolute ease, and then the middle way, and then learning to navigate the different polarities in that exploration. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, and I honestly recently in the last year and I spoke about this on the last podcast that we did, as I've discovered music and mantra, now it's easy. So to practice yoga or to practice spiritual work is nothing more than just chanting in my head, which is totally natural and joyful. So it's a part of my way that I'm discovering. So then you're remaining in a yogic state without having to try anymore. Yeah, so I think that's important to note.
Yeah, I think all these practices are trying to get us to a state of being or a level of awareness, maybe resting in the state of awareness itself. And there are different triggers, right? Like, I don't speak about emotional triggers, but different tools or ways that will get us to that place of higher spiritual consciousness or awareness.
And you have to find it yourself, though.
You have to figure out
like
what
yours.
that is.
No teacher can tell you.
Exactly. But there's these different practices, and some of them traditionally have been quite intense. Like the Vision Quest is pretty intense. Vipassana is pretty intense. Sundance, Sweat Lodge, these are all pretty intense practices. Darkness immersions. And then there's a lot of modern retreats where they do breath work, which has a level of intensity depending on how you're doing it. And then they're doing like yoga and eye gazing, and then like massage, and like there's a lighter tone or nature to it. And I think painting broad strokes here, our society needs the softer approach given our level of comfort that we're conditioned to right now. And so the new age there's a lot of like airy-fairy new age spirituality that is void, again, broadly speaking, of like resilience and these real tests of initiation. And so I think there's value both ways, the middle path like you're suggesting, but to go and do the hard thing, to really find where your limit is, the Goggins approach is important, I think.
Yeah.
To test yourself, have these moments of intentional intensity willingly before it knocks on our doorstep and we're not prepared.
I believe the Buddha is the one who originally talked about the middle way. If not, he was a definite proponent of it, I believe. I'm not a Buddhist scholar, but he talks about the middle way. And how did he get there? He did like 40 days of intense water and dry fasting. It was like, that's the path to finding that place of ease. It's talked about in meditation all the time. To reach true meditation, which in my understanding is more of a state of being. I say true meditation to differentiate it because we use meditation very loosely nowadays. Oh, I'm gardening and I'm meditating, and oh, I'm running and I'm meditating, which is true. It has a meditative aspect, but if we call everything meditation, nothing's meditation. So my understanding of true meditation, it's a state of being, and it's the state, at least in the 8 limbs of yoga, the state after concentration. Concentration is inhibition. You have to focus on something at the point of exclusion of other things. And most people can't focus for a long enough time to even center themselves in that way. But it takes that period of intense concentration, and at a certain point, concentration will give way to meditation. And that's the transition where the effort becomes ease, but with the sustained focus that was cultivated in the effort. But now you don't have to work at it.
Yeah.
And I believe, everything that happens in this realm has a correlate in the brain. And there would be a certain shifting over of certain circuitries and how that all works in the prefrontal cortex. But yeah, that's how it works in working out. It's how it works in riding like a bike.
Everything.
It's hard in the beginning, and then once you know it, you just ride that thing.
It happens in climbing. Like if you're on a really difficult climb, and then you all of a sudden it's extremely a lot of effort, and then all of a sudden it becomes flow state. Happens in breathing, where if you're doing breathwork sessions and you just all of a sudden you're doing breathwork, then all of a sudden the breath starts breathing you. That's a really interesting thing to note right now.
And another thing to note on the practices you talked about, almost all those are either run by a masculine founder of those religions or are predominantly in their original source for the men, which is why they're more like an initiation in a warrior thing.
Part of the argument for that some of those indigenous practices being predominantly oriented towards the men is because they say that the women have their own initiation monthly as they go through their menstrual cycle, and they bleed every single month, which is, you know, a huge sacrifice. And then to actually bring a child into the world, I can't begin to imagine what that pain and discomfort and that initiation is like, to carry that being for 9 months and then birth it into the world, and then again, like, mother it until it could survive on its own, which is a long process.
Yeah.
And obviously the father's involved in that, but not to the level of the woman. And so the men have to go through these intentional hardships, perhaps to balance the scales. You know, that's one perspective that I've heard shared.
I agree with that. I haven't looked into this, but it resonates pretty true with me that it's a lot to do with the nervous system, and then a male's nervous system couldn't handle child's birth, or the average male's, because it's too intense. But a female already has that resilience built into the system because of how many eons of going through it. And the men, the work that we do is to strengthen our system to rise to that level. I don't know if that's true, but
Good model.
yeah.
Good model.
And so then we also wanted to speak about the subconscious reprogramming. Do you want to share about that?
Yeah, it's been something I would say I've been doing for many years, since my early 20s. And subconscious reprogramming, as a definition, our subconscious is the storehouse of our program pattern likes and dislikes, fears and phobias, and all of our conditioned habit pattern reactions to life. And a lot of that is our conditioning, or what we've received, or what has been done in the past. And quite intuitively, I would take myself out to the forest in my early 20s and just eat mushrooms and kind of go crazy in a kind of ecstatic dance kind of way, like break free of the regular patterns of what it was to be what I was acting as a human. It's like deconditioning, which is part of the process of like breaking down the program pattern. And then there's the subconscious reprogramming, which is like the implementation of the new program. And this is how a lot of mantra works. We attune to a certain frequency that we want to cultivate within us, and then we use repetition and a certain amount of energy or emotional force that can be put behind it, and this can shift our very wiring of how we perceive and do and be and act in the world.
And so how hard is it to break those initial patterns?
Depends how deeply woven they are. Our belief systems can be very deeply ingrained as habit patterns that we've been reinforcing, and they can also be connected to other belief systems that hold them in place, and these can also be held within certain family units. So there's a lot to it, to breaking free of some of the bondage.
And actually clearing those charges that are stored within our body, because there is like a physiological component a lot of times, right? The emotion is stored in a specific location or organ. And can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, the information, and science is still understanding how exactly we store so much memory in our system. To my understanding, we haven't found where it lies, and my understanding would be holographically everywhere in the DNA, and expressed especially in the water in our cells, which can hold our beliefs and a lot of our memory in there. So when we do a lot of clearing, such as fasting, and we do a lot of reprogramming work, such as continual mantra, we're changing the vibrational core of who we are. And I forgot the question.
It's kind of like this idea of somatic practices to clear the stored energy, which you're speaking to a little bit. And I think that's really important, is seeing where the charge lives. I'm also thinking of, you spoke to the constellation of these different patterns, how things are all related to, so some patterns are related to other patterns. And within that, There are systems like internal family systems that actually speak to the different characteristics that are associated with the actual conditioned part that results from trauma. So we literally have a series of personalities in our psyche. We don't have a monomind, which a lot of people perceive ourselves to be, but we're actually like a cast of characters that live inside our psyche. So we could actually recognize which parts of ourselves are associated with certain traumas or certain conditioning, and recognize that part's individual needs. Does that make sense?
Can you give another example?
Yeah.
I feel like I get it, but...
Yeah, so if there's a part of me that, let's say, is really self-conscious about public speaking, well, maybe that arose from a traumatizing event when I was young in like elementary school. I embarrassed myself when I was speaking in front of the whole class. So there's a younger version of myself that exists in that fear of embarrassment, because essentially embarrassment means rejection, which means like being kicked out of the tribe, right? So I could go in and put that younger version of myself at ease and in a sense be clearing that story or that fear, right? So it's kind of like reprogramming through re-parenting in a way. And we could do that with essentially any like context. So we recognize a charge coming up, a fear response or whatever it may be, and I could ask myself, where is this fear coming from? And then I might get a sensation in the body, so that speaks to the somatic aspect. But I could also ask what the story is. It's like, okay, why are you afraid? What are you afraid of? How old are you? And then eventually, so there's a dialogue process that might come through meditation or journaling. And then I could ask that part of myself what it actually needs. Like, what do you need right now? I need to feel safe. Okay, what will allow you to feel safe? Sometimes it's like knowing that you support me. Right, so that younger version of myself is speaking to my more mature and grown and capable self.
We do a fair amount of work that's very similar to that in men's work, mostly led when it's done by Vern Petty or Damien Kai Norman, who are clinical counselors. And a little bit different in the reparenting. It's more, depending on the context, about expressing that emotion that wasn't able to come to the surface. And for a lot of men, it's an anger or frustration, and then we, in some sense, ritually enact it or act it out by getting that individual to tap back into where that lives in the body and bringing up in the nervous system much of those same sensations, and then allowing them to either push somebody or to let out a rage, and then to completely process, to feel all that, and then to come into the safety of a community. And we would often lift them up or something and have the reintegration, and that helps to complete that part.
Does that work?
It's very
often?
Effective.
Yeah.
I don't specialize in this because I like to use the energy of prana or chi, which I find to, I'm going to say it work better. That's in my opinion. And rather than going into each individual story, which you would have to go through in order to do that, if you vitalize the whole system and you stretch the system where all of this stuff lives, and you bring enough energy through the central column of the spine, which is where all the energy and information and the conditioning processes ultimately as it moves into the consciousness, then we can actually clear a lot of the karma or the past habit pattern reactions much faster than going into each story and acting it out. That's just been my personal practice and where I orient more of my time and focus, but both effective methods for sure. And they both have positives and negatives, which one doesn't have, or positives and negatives. So I'm not for or against either one, right?
I like that. I like that kind of treating the whole system rather than the individual stories, because there's so many stories that our psyche is made up of. To start that practice of charging the central energy channel, like where would one begin?
Finding a valid teacher.
But what would be like a simple like practice of moving the energy? Do you have
Find
one
a
you could
teacher.
offer?
Get proper instruction. Proper instruction meaning there's a transmission of energy from that teacher, which can't be told over a podcast or on the internet. And yeah, you know, any type of breath work and these kind of things can be effective. But if you're talking about someone serious and wanting to really work with the spinal column in that way, find a teacher for sure.
I think that's excellent advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're serious about doing anything, I'd say get a teacher, get a coach, whatever you're doing. Like, it's tried and true. The best basketball players in the world have a coach. I promise.
Yeah, but they also started dribbling on their own.
Sure.
Just to be a contrarian.
That's true. But just starting to dribble on your own, you can get pretty far. But if you really wanted to take it to the next level and you want to go somewhere, you want to really transform, I like his advice.
Well, with the internal arts, it's a little bit I don't want to say deceiving, but like take the example martial arts, which it has an external form. You can kind of dick around with your buddies and get pretty good at fighting, but not black belt level. Now, in the internal arts, you don't see a lot of what's happening unless you're already in the higher level of psychic awareness where you can see energy.
Like, it takes a great teacher to be able to read you.
Yeah, but the idea is like in order for them to transfer those skills onto you, it's like their energy and being in their energy field is what teaches you. Totally. Just like you have to train with a high level black belt to get to that level.
Because it's like a mirroring matching almost thing.
Yeah, you're
lately I've been playing a lot with the harmonium, and I'm really working to open my voice now and open my chest and open my heart specifically. This whole region has to open. But by playing the harmonium, it's so full that when I actually sing an ohm with the harmonium, I go way further. It's way easier because I can match it. Mm-hmm. But without the harmonium, I'm by myself trying to do it. And I think of that when I think of like a breathwork teacher, or like, yeah, if you're rolling around with a black belt,
yeah,
you're going to be mixing and matching and mirroring that energy.
Yeah.
It's just going to be more straightforward. Basically, the path will be more straightforward.
Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why I practice every day, because I serve people every day. If my system's not attuned, people are calibrating their system with my system. We're co-regulating and we're working together. If I'm out of whack, I can't serve in an effective or integral way. Mm-hmm. Or I can't teach yoga in an effective
I think that's great, because you're kind of speaking about you're looping back to like the ROI that we brought up earlier. It's like consistency is important because it's recognition of the state of being that we're in, and constantly regulating that through intentional practice
and repetition.
And you also just spoke about service a little bit, so let's bridge into that. And I wonder if you want to continue speaking to how you like to be in service, what being in service is, and why it's important.
I like to see myself as Hanuman. Hanuman. Who's the archetypal representation of someone with complete devotion. So much so that when he rips open his chest, he's devoted to Sita and Ram, and he's got a little miniature version of them in his heart, and all of his ribs have Sitaram, 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 Sitaram written all over them. I haven't tattooed my inner ribs yet, but
you're on trend.
Yeah.
He's a fundamentalist.
Exactly. Service. Well, coming into spirituality, I can definitely admit, seeing it now, that I was very conditioned by my Christian missionary upbringing. And there was a little bit of like I don't know if it's like a Christ complex of not saving people, but there was like a kind of like impetus that might have been seeded when I was young, that you serve people, which has a good impulse and a bad impulse depending on how we take it, of course. But ultimately my attunement to who I am, just like the harmonia comes from being in relationship, and the other half of the giving is the receiving, and ultimately the receiving is the giving. So service becomes that like way of life, and it becomes really necessary in terms of where I'm at with my dharma. I lose myself in some sense. Like if I'm off my path when I'm not serving, it can feel that way unless I'm doing things that bolster how I'm going to serve at a future time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's just so intertwined with who I am now. It's like part of the subconscious reprogramming is to have all my actions not just for myself, but to be calibrated to how are they affecting my family and my community and earth. And that's the striving towards, is like raising my consciousness and the intention behind my actions so that they are rippling in a good way, so that my actions aren't just serving myself, which have time tested to be more unsatisfying. It's just a simple thing, right? It's just not as satisfying anymore, and naturally it's like, what can I do to serve more, because that just what feels better. It's a natural course of things. That makes sense?
Yeah, well said.
Makes sense.
Hanuman.
Brad, what do you think of service, and how do you like to be of service?
Well, I agree with everything he said, and yeah, all of the teachers I've ever had have said that to be of service is something you do for yourself, is what, by just following that self-centeredness in a way, is the way that you serve others in the highest capacity. Because yeah, once you realize that intrinsic feeling of being of service to others and to the earth, it feels the best, and then you feel better, and then others feel better, and then you feel better, and so on and so forth. And I think you have to really look for that path. What does it? Because I've done a lot of things that might look like in my life that might look like they're helping others or for the benefit, but if it's not like in alignment with my dharma, I'm not going to get that same feeling. I want to share an experience I had recently, which was really special for me. It was actually last weekend, and part of me coming into learning about my own path and my own dharma and how I can serve, it has to do with sound and music and just sharing my voice in that way. And we were out, we went to a spot, you guys know the spot, Kilometer 14, where we do our sacred dance events. And I went to go scope it out because that's something I do to be of service for the community, but also because I love dancing and movement and doing that type of work. But going out there, the place was like wrecked again, and this is the second year, and I'm there with my partner, and we're both like almost crying because it's just like the energy is just beat. The energy is just depressed, and it felt like something like unconsciousness was there, just kind of doing damage to the land. So I'm like, well, should we leave? Like, can we really do a medicine journey here right now with this type of dense energy? And then my partner is like, yeah, we should. That's actually why we should stay, because the land needs us. So we stayed, and it was a little bit dense at the start. We had a fire, we did some clearing, had sage, and but then I got into the musical aspect of the journey. So we were working with psilocybin and sitting with psilocybin. And when I got into the music, I just felt such a sense of fulfillment and being of service to the land. Just by playing beautiful vibration, I could feel that the land wanted me there. And I've never really had that experience. That's fairly new to me. And there was no one there. Like, it's not like other people, I was being of service to people, but it was actually just being like really sharing my love for, because that's what harmonium and kirtan is all about. It's just sharing love and sharing my love for creation and sharing my love for the land and thank you and just all that coming through in mantra. And that felt so of service. And it wasn't about people or anything in that way. And that's something, that's a whole new gate now. Because for me, I was just like, oh, because I'm discovering something that's in alignment with my dharma, just by going and doing that around the world or just in places, whether there's people there or not, is not you're doing the work. And it really reminded me of a friend of mine. This is before I ever got into spirituality. This is like 15 years ago, maybe. A friend of mine, way back at in that day, he left for India to go, and he just never came home. So he was my workout partner at the time. He went to India. He was going through a lot of really difficult stuff in his family here, and he just left to India. Literally never came home. It was like maybe 13 years later or something when he finally did come back, and I saw him at some point. But he shared with me about kirtan, and this is long before I was into spirituality or anything, and he was telling me all about what it was about. And they would go around and chant Hare Krishna in all the major cities, like New York and like big cities, and people would yell at them and be like, get out of the streets, and just not being the kindest, really difficult energies to deal with. And I remember him sharing with me, one of his friends, like, well, let's get out of here, like, what are we doing? And he's like, no, that it doesn't matter if they know they're receiving good vibration or not. That's the work. We're sharing positive, beautiful, loving vibration, and it doesn't matter whether they know that they're receiving that benefit or not. So that's the work. We got to do that. And that story really I'm starting to understand it in a new way now. In fact, I'm really just starting to understand it as I'm saying it right now, because this experience is fairly new. Like I said last weekend, feeling like I was contributing just by sitting in the parks in the nature singing. I've never felt that, really.
I think it's really beautiful and really important to note. And the one comment I want to make about your friend who's going around and singing mantras in public places where people don't understand, it's also like the pushback of the darkness, right? Like they're showing up with so much light, there is going to be resistance to that as you're putting the light out there into the world.
Yeah.
And the other thing about nature is a lot of people go to these holy or sacred places to receive, right? They go to these holy mountains and they want something.
Yeah.
Right? And it's really important to recognize that that's an energetic entity as well. A being maybe even has like, in my belief system, it definitely has a spirit, and maybe it's even conscious. And so it gets depleted. It's been there for years, eons. And to go to these places and simply offer our love, offer our song is a really wonderful practice. I'm on a new piece of land that I just had the privilege of arriving at the beginning of the week, and I'm so grateful to be there, like a cabin in the woods. And right away I went and bought some flowers, and over the week I've been just walking around the land and offering flowers to the land and just saying thank you, trying to build that relationship. And it takes a long time to do that, but when you are aware and tuned in, and sometimes the medicine helps.
The medicine was helping.
The medicine definitely helps.
Yeah.
Then we recognize, like, yes, there is a reciprocity that is built, and also we could feel the appreciation from the land. Yeah.
I can't believe, and it's sometimes like an experience like that reminds you that you're always in that relationship, and that the world and the land and people are listening to what you do and what you say, and you kind of forget. And then when these kinds of experiences remind me, and then I realize, oh yeah, and then all the times when I wasn't aware, the world was still listening, the spirit was still listening, nature was still listening, even all those times when I wasn't aware there was listening going on. And yeah.
And that's even on like a thought level, right?
I want to share one more thing, because I messaged you the next day saying, can I come help you with firekeeping? So you're going to appreciate, Kyle's really going to appreciate this. This is my phone. It's all good. So we're in the medicine, and Brianna is lying down. She's just in bliss doing her journey. I'm tinkering around. I'm like doing some breath work. I'm trying to sing a little. I'm gonna make some tea. I want to make some tea. I want to make the fire. But I'm like, okay, it's starting to get dark and cold. It's time to go make the fire. And I had chopped up some wood, the big wood, like medium size, and some small stuff. I start making it, but I lost my focus. And partway through it, the fire, like I've lit it now, but I didn't do it properly. I didn't really build the foundation properly. Like I kind of threw it together. I'm like, it's fire, it's wood, it'll go. Like it's all really dry wood. It's a dry night. I've got paper, and it starts going, but it's not really structured properly. It's smoky, and I just start to realize that like I think I lost my attention, and I had to like, so the thing is just not built properly. It's not lighting properly. And I'm like, shit, this isn't going to work the way I want it to work. Like, it's just not working. So I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, man, what kind of an idiot can't light a fire with dry wood? So I'm really embarrassed of myself. And I end up being like, I have to start over and do this right. But it's now on fire. So I'm trying to take apart a fire that's already on fire. But it's not structured the way I want it to be. So I end up having to take it apart, put it on, like, take it out of the fire pit. I'm starting over, but now it's so smoky. I'm looking at Rihanna, and I'm like, oh, I hope she's not, like, judging me. She does eventually look up, and she's like, what are you doing? And she's laughing at me. I'm super embarrassed, and I literally look at the land in the fire, and, like, the transmission from Spirit and was literally just, like, do it properly. And I was just sitting there, like, oh my God, like, do it. If you're going to do it properly. And it was such a clear instruction. And I was like, I have to go to do Sweat Lodge now and spend time there and go like I have to make a commitment of some kind and go learn how to build a fire properly, right from the core all the way out. And obviously the Sweat Lodge is the best way to do it, because I've never really like taken the time to do it. And I'm like, how you do, like, just focus on the fundamentals and do it properly. But that instruction of just do it properly for the rest of the night, it started transmitting to all these other areas of my life. And like, then I had another experience that same night regarding, you guys know the situation I was in last year with the girls. And it was just the same instruction. Like, you want to be with a woman, do it properly. There is a right way to do it. There's a way to do this in integrity. So maybe not, there's only one way to do it, but there's process and a way, there's a integral way to do these things.
Absolutely.
You can build a fire with various techniques, but there's an integral way to do it with each technique. Same with like being with a woman, if whatever, but it was like you didn't do it well. It was, you did it out of integrity, and it came through in my fire.
I love that story.
Brutal. I mean, yes, it's amazing though, but the land was speaking with me.
I love that story, and the fire is such a potent teacher, and every time I build one I get that. And there's this line that I've been hearing circulate recently, which is, times are critical, we must go slowly.
Yeah.
And so slow down, take your time, do things with awareness and intention, right? Understanding why we're doing it in the first place. And the fire that I tend actually maybe not every week, but as regularly as I'm available, is at Reuben George's Sweat Lodge in Vancouver. And every time I'm there, I'm learning lessons. And sometimes the fire goes up really well, and sometimes it doesn't. And it's usually a group of us that are working it. So there's different ways and different approaches. And there has to be, so there's like an interpersonal dynamic that we have to be mindful of, and we have to work together as a community to build this fire. And no matter how many times we do it, it's not a guarantee that it's going to go well, because sometimes it's raining. Building a big, like we're talking about a giant fire in the rain, is a really challenging thing to do. And there's an element of pressure there, because sometimes there's 50 people that show up to sweat, and this is like their church, right? This is the Sunday ceremony that everybody is showing up for their own healing, or for prayers of greater collective healing, their family, the world, the earth, the water. And so it's really important to me that the fire gets done in a good way.
Yeah. And
I think only once built the fire fully on my own. And there's like a level of anxiousness that came with that, right? The pressure of trying to do this thing well. And I could see that my dysregulation in the process. And it's like, okay, I have to be efficient, I have to move quickly, but I have to do it in a good way.
Yeah.
So finding that balance. And yeah, so many good teachings in there. the fire burnt me really good last Sunday. Like this blast of heat came out and like singed my eyebrows and my eyelashes and my facial hair. So yeah, it never stops teaching. So I think this idea of being of service is super important, and often in modern day spirituality, it's this hyper individualistic pursuit of peak experiences in personal development, but there's no relationality within that, where often people say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, and it means they're on their own path and they're on their quest for the Holy Grail, but they're actually not serving the world around them. And arguably, as we grow and develop and learn to regulate our system, then we are having a ripple out effect. But who are we actually serving? So there's like active spirituality versus passive spirituality. And the modern spiritual movement is quite passive. And so you were speaking about Hanuman, and Ram Dass often told these stories of Hanuman, and Ram Dass's point was like, get out there and serve the people. And his famous interaction with Maharaji, he's like, what does it mean to be enlightened? And he says, feed people. And Ram Dass is like, okay, something got lost in translation. He's like, no. He's like, what does it mean to know God? And Maharaji's like, be of service. Feed people, be of service. And maybe that's as simple as it needs to be. And when we think about feeding people, it doesn't need to be literal food, but getting out there and providing people something that they're longing for. And if that's like greater self-awareness, and this is what you guys are doing in some of your work, or any other type of spiritual practice that helps them transcend their conditioned patterns, then we're doing something that's beneficial. Singing to the forest is being of service, that's being beneficial. Building a fire is beneficial, right? There's all these different ways, and it doesn't need to be grandiose.
It's how you're being while you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like it's that whole adage, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. It's just the shift in how you being while you do these things. So then feeding, like you said, feeding people is feeding good, what's required essentially.
Yeah,
I don't even want to say good or bad.
For?
Yeah, what's required is being fed.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good place to kind of wrap up this conversation. And I wonder if anybody has any closing remarks, reflections, prompts to the audience.
Did we do a question last time? I think we all did a question last time. I think that'd be interesting.
We asked a question of the audience?
No, we all responded. It was like something about a practice that we could offer, and we all each gave something.
Right.
You can do something like that.
How about what makes you feel most of service at this time in your life?
What makes me feel most of service?
Sure, that could be the question. I mean, and yes, you.
Right now, I'm on a path of turning inwards as I go to Peru for a month to work with ayahuasca, and a lot of that will be in isolation. So it's me focusing on my joy in that time and aligning with my truth and letting everything else fall to the side, let my phone go and my duties in the world go for a little bit, so I can just focus on spirit and come back with whatever I'm offered in that time, and to share that to the best of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like the hero's journey.
Which part? I'm at the scary part, am I? I know it's going to get hard.
It's going to get hard, yeah. You're going to meet your ordeal, but the hero's journey, at the end, you return to the village with the elixir. Right?
Well, you have to decide if you can return.
If you return?
Because part of the hero's journey is there's a decision that has to be made.
Right.
It's whether you think you are capable of bringing the jewel home and sharing it. There's a doubt that happens in the actual book, The Hero's Journey.
But there's a doubt at the beginning, I think, the inciting incident.
Yeah, but then there's also the doubt of like, now that I've acquired it, can I actually go home and share it, or should I, or will it be manipulated and it's not worth
13 years in Peru.
So this is goodbye.
Okay, Kyle, how about you?
Ways that I am appreciating being of service, well, these podcasts for one, and so I'm kind of leaning into my creativity this year through the podcast. I am finally finishing this long piece of writing. It's 15,000 words, so it's the longest piece I've ever written.
Wow.
And it speaks about my worldview around a lot of the topics of discussion and being of service and devotion. And also greater collective concerns like worldly concerns, environmental concerns, and
the paper addresses that?
The piece of writing, yeah.
Okay.
And in part, it is like a call to action for people to find their own dharmic path and be like, what are you in service to? Like, what are you willing to make sacrifices for? So I've been really enjoying that process. And then later on, in the fall, I'll be putting together a men's retreat, which I'm really excited about. And that will be built around a indigenous ceremony, a peyote sweat lodge. And we're going to do martial arts and nature connection practices. You know, some of the practices from that Tom Brown lineage that I was speaking about earlier. So I'm really, really excited about that. And all these things excite me, actually.
Beautiful.
And you?
And me, well, for sure the main thing is stepping into sound and music. And as I'm realizing the depth of that calling and that passion and that this quality that I can share, it's actually encouraging me to do. Now I have a new desire for like breath work and even like yoga practice, like asana and stuff, because these are all modalities to open my body so that I can sing better, which is really beautiful. So I'm realizing like the power of sharing about and encouraging people and anyone who watches this podcast to just keep searching for your dharma and the things that your real calling, because when you discover that, everything, all the other stuff gets pulled with it, is what I'm feeling. And and also like I've also been feeling a lot of fulfillment from just doing ironically like business coaching stuff lately, because as my life over the last while has freed up more because of my abilities in business, I'm seeing the benefits of helping others with that now. And because I really believe the whole purpose of commerce and business in general is to help us live more open, free lives so that we can do spiritual work. That's why I do it. I want to have more freedom so that I can do more personal and purposeful work. And when we do that, others feel that and see it, and it encourages them to find their own way. Because again, I don't think anyone can tell you your way. You have to really... Maybe you get lucky and stumble into it, but sometimes you have to just keep looking. Don't settle, and you'll know.
What about sacred dance?
Sacred dance, it's another one that's amazing. Yeah, I started it for personal reasons because my desire to dance because as a modality for freedom and healing and transformation, and I definitely get a lot of value out of hosting that for the community. There's so many things, but yeah, that's another one. If we release this podcast, well, it'll get released relatively soon. We do something called Sacred Dance, which is for community. You guys both always attend and act nuts. You're the firekeeper. You climb trees.
I subconscious reprogram.
But yeah, modalities like dance. I'd say dance has been one of the main modalities for me for most of my life, for transformation and moving energy and finding freedom more than anything. And I think that's a growing movement for sure right now. There's various varieties of dance and movement to get out of the rigidity of our social structures.
Absolutely, the linear movement in mind.
Yeah.
So I think we've given a lot of little seeds of contemplation for the listeners, and even some practices, some suggestions in there. And yeah, I hope people have found this helpful and useful, and I think we'll do more, eh? You guys want to do more?
We'll do more. Comment if you want to, if you have anything you want to jam on, want us to jam on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Topic requests. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll post this I'll put this on my YouTube channel so you can comment there.
Jai Hanuman.
Thanks for the conversation,
Hanuman.
brothers.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment, and perhaps sharing with others. And if you are curious about some of the services I offer, you can check out my website, connectionintegration.com. You'll see on there that I offer one-on-one support and guidance based around spiritual and mental wellness. I also offer nature connection experiences and plant medicine retreats throughout the year. Until next time, wishing you much curiosity, wonder, and peace as you open yourself up to the wild tameless. Be well.